start, I just wanted to give you something you could see, because we can't exactly drag sculpture up the hill. This is Richard Serra. It's a great book of interviews. He actually writes a lot. It's an example of one of his pieces that is in a museum. I should also thank the Oakland Public Library. This is an example of one of his taller pieces out in public. This is a sculpture called Tilted Arc, which is a little bit controversial and is no more. So there's that. So in the off-peak hours, downtown San Francisco, where there are so many stacks of offices like blue fangs, with the usual forte, it's all basically empty. Think the polar bear tank at the zoo when the animal is off. Just the built environments. But walking around, especially impressive are the glassed-in lobbies that radiate, and I am in a stance, biting at the tissue of my mouth, the silk inside the purse, in front of this one building, looking in at Charlie Brown. It's this minimalist sculpture by Richard Serra. Over 100 tons of weatherproof steel stood upright, 60 feet indoors. Plates turning around each other at the shoulders like chamber music. They are amber, somewhere between estery ale and the rust color of Buddha's robes. Looking up at it, there is something about brute beauty, about our moving terrariums and the scuzzy feeling of not being able to get close to anything. I try not to ignore these feelings. Richard Serra was born here in San Francisco in 1939. I can imagine him carrying his shoes down the beaches, letting them clop together, or drawing on butcher paper, pencils rolling on an even floor. He'd go down to the docks and watch the primalness of ships being unroped from land, the tall shapes of something like that, simultaneously walking beside it and walking underneath. By his late teens and college years, he was catching hot rivets in steel factories, charmed. I'd put him at about 5'6", bull-looking, all knuckle. Late 1960s in New York City, he'd hung out with theory heavies in bars after days in studios, plaster in hair, thinking about how to get the work to actually happen. He noticed modern dancers at the time using lifts. He noticed the no to the moving or being moved philosophy of Yvonne Rainer, and he started working on what he calls stunts, splashing lead into corners with ladles, lashing vulcanized rubber to walls, and using lists of verbs as instructions to suspend, to gather, to heap, to disarrange, to bond, to continue. His behemoths, the rolled steel plates, dramatic sculptures reaching like someone paused in the action of pulling a shirt over their head. The ones like Charlie Brown show up after. These are unpedestaled sculptures, fixated on weight and situation, remarkably unshoddy and taxed. He once watched workers pull a helicopter from a building it had just crashed into. He hired these workers to move his sculptures. Looking in on Charlie Brown, I think about the fact in command of church organs, how this office building is more riddled, more blessed around the sculpture the way Saint Sebastian is more blessed around arrows. I think about how I know little of tonnage, about the slow power of these sculptures. I was the kid in high school who got hit with milkshakes for moving cars. I've broken a flip phone by ringing it in every direction away from itself. the front of my face feeling like an avalanche coming off. I've waited for a TB shot at the Berkeley Free Clinic and calculated what it'd be like to be there and be more afraid or desperate to wait for the chemistry of an STD test. Would the chairs look the same? Would the doctors? Would the air outside be as sharp? Would I have a better idea what's really permanent? What impressions, John Updike once asked of Serra's sculptures, do they offer unobtainable by a sensitive observer in a railroad yard or underneath a highway overpass or at the mouth of a tunnel? What the sculpture asks more directly than any sculpture in my mind is for you to just show up like bedside manner, to notice those minute changes in dynamics circling it, the extract. I can't explain really. Serra says he goes after agitation, the mix of anxiety and nervous excitement. And maybe that explains what makes my body feel like a loose formation of bees hovering over bubbling water. Maybe that explains what makes my heart do that cartoon thing, Tex Avery thing, where it pongs so hard against my chest, my knees plumb give out. I mean, I walk the length of his work, union of the torus and the sphere, steel in tons again, crammed in a gallery like an elephant in an alleyway, in the cracker factory of Dia Beacon, walked around it and still couldn't map it if I tried. Full stop. When I am around his art, I don't feel I'm in as much debt as I'm in. There are plenty who feel the opposite. See photographs of artist David Hammonds pissing against the 70-ton TWU in Tribeca. See Tilted Arc, a perfect steel wave, 120 feet long and 12 feet high, a headache, bolted in front of a government building. Complaints about it blocking security cameras, serving as a blast wall during a terrorist attack, fear like dentures until the sculpture was ripped down from the brick and flattened. This gets to the guts of it really. The styrofoam cup of live bait that is politics, moral rights, the artist's rights to integrity, art as property and liability, on and on. I invite you to put your gob around that fire hose as long as humanly possible. The sculptor was noticeably bruised. The way his quotes begin to sound sour and broken-lanced. Quote, the government has no use for art or artists. Quote, I don't think it is the function of art to be pleasing. It has nothing to do with entertainment. Quote, art is not democratic. It is not for the people. I admit I am a sap for this aggression too, the pushy hand in your chest quality, the fuck what you think. Anger like a blood nurse who can't find the vein, like one hand closing in around a barb. When I back up from Charlie Brown, I'm thinking of Richard Serra arguing with Charlie Rose on TV in that void of his about another sculpture, Intervals. And does it look like a cemetery or doesn't it? If only they do something honest, like get in a clinch and bite at each other's ears. The tons, the steel that he works in is the most irrational response to the world, the most cost to it, the most right. He's putting sculptures in the deserts of Qatar now. Godspeed. He says to Rose, I want to exceed my own language. What a privilege to be sand. I was thinking about the next difficult thing, which is writing in sculptures. And at the same time, a friend asked me, what would it look like if you wrote about joy? So this is the answer. Towards, to ram, to brain, to lock, to overpass, to name, to bash, to grain, to take. We're horseshoeing towards the Oregon coast, me with May, us keeping each other awake, the talk departing our heads in a car, clayed, slouching. We pass lumber yards, the sweat rings on ball caps of the Pacific Northwest. the tree trunks carried as cargo, like battering rams in cribs, all labor. We'd gone through a forest fire being tamed, a fog making romantic with the road, and all we could think to say was about how safe we were as we swung for the ocean, the cathedral smoke given off by the burning trees coming through the air conditioner. That morning in the camp's coin-op showers, barely there, feeling gargled and cherub-like from tent sleeping, close to woods, deep woods, or what they call undeveloped land, my head churned like a lottery cage, the logic of the most buoyant idea so early. I think about how scientists want to map out the brain, block by petrified block. And I've read they're finding there's a limit on how much we can actually grieve, like process, and how we really only have enough grief for one funeral. Isn't that enough? It explains, maybe unsoundly, why it's hard to really understand a figure like 10,000 deaths. Can't bring words to it, because at some point, at capacity, there isn't any more to be magnified. I understand this uncapable feeling, the no more, the dredging and dredging to meet bedrock, because even now, as much as I want to think more about this basic, sippy cup biology, this is where what I know cliffs, and I can really only start retracing, nothing left to explore. I let the running water delta against my jaw and watched a daddy longlegs suffocating in the steam, twiddling on web, its own tongue. I shook my head before jimmying off the faucet. On the slow walk from the sheds, towel matadored over my arm, I'd watch families start fires for breakfast and mashed my hand into my nose, stuffed up. Hours and hours of this nature. I kissed the pentagon of May's forehead, her hair still wet in curls, gyres falling over themselves like flowers on wallpaper. We rode over a bay, white piles of oysters dumped from the buckets, on shore, a million lovers' open lockets. I can tell she'd been in accidents before. When we get close to something up ahead, the way she thumps at the invisible brake on the floor on her side of the car. There is no order to what we talk about, but me and May always seem to find our way back to the doom. It's this code word we use to talk about ruining each other, the end of us, jokingly. The things we know just don't work, but we ignore. But honestly, it's like a feeling in the chest, and it's like doom. But it's also like the sound, doom, something falling from a great height. I keep worrying on this trip, waiting for the tires to blow out, for the dashboard to burst open with the sort of smoke and dust and paper that a car coughs up when crashed into, like the aftermath of firecrackers. But then I look over. She asked me what I meant when I said she makes everything clear. May is teaching me about photos of Martha Graham, the real untitled art of her with velocity and toes. I am teaching her the words to a song, Random Rules, in the same car on the Maze overpass, tearing away from Oakland, the cabin filled with sun. On to the next adventure, I mouth along to her. No one should have two lives. Now you know my middle names are wrong and right. Honey, we've got two lives to give tonight. We agree after a while that for all the 101's long-faced elegance, it would be better if they just hammered it straight, cut up the coast, fasten it with highways the way punks use clothespins to tailor the rents in their black tees. When we reach the pull-off for the Pacific, it looks God-given, the color of laundry detergent, a soft sculpture. I pit the endlessness of the Pacific against the endlessness of Lake Erie, say, just south of Buffalo, where I rested against bone-smooth driftwood. How shall I look into the flat endlessness of both shining lake and sea, the ungulpable? Is one supposed to do something different than the other, out here or in me? On the west coast, the sun abandons its light like coins, bouncing off the bluffs that look fuzzy, Shanshui and giant, the mountains from scrolls, ink going all tadpole in a bowl of brushwater. May gets out and spools a mustard yellow scarf about her neck, laughing for the hell, her pocked metal earrings like the comb of the moon. She picks up some fruit, a peach, from the back seat to take with us. I sigh. I always sigh. Accurate, alas. The movies, the four-edged facts don't do the Pacific justice. You'd get to thinking it's not all that glorious. A house wrapped in a plastic sheet carried around on the back of a truck. I figure I wouldn't know how to explain waves to anyone if asked. The bedrock again. In some urgency, some hurry to get down the steps to the coast proper, jittery with good fortune, I am pulling May's hand in my hand. May slips and digs her fingers into the peach she's holding, the blush juice rushing out to brace herself. I've got her by the other hand. I can feel all the muscles lifting her up, and we're working together on this broken way of going forward. Out on the low tide sand, it opens up, and it's like suddenly, after difficulty, we've outrun the pack. We're out way ahead, on our own. We run towards the water in the wind, our bodies like flags, like futurist paintings, amok. When we slow, we say to each other that we wish we could think deeply about nature, but it's not in our grain. We're not keepers. I mentioned the glacier Lake Awasting I grew up dipping in, the apple orchard fences of the Hudson Valley with cores in the grass. I know about the trick with arrowheads, how you gotta wait until it rains, walk out onto the fields, and they just rise up out of the soil. It just doesn't mean all that much to me. We listen to the ocean, hums distinct from other hums. I'm not thinking of the horsehair of a tire ripped up or the endlessness I am next to, but its magnitude. I get to think there are so few moments that are nectarous, that are good. And it can be coming in from the wild or the well-vacuumed opera house steps, but I want to be open for it. I turn to face May, even if we are up against the doom. May is putting her fingers in her mouth. She is bleeding in spills from her peach-soaked fingers and her sandals. We're both bashful and agnostic about emergency. We go back to the car, bandage her toes like palmetto roses, feel close enough to make air seem useless. May closes her eyes next to me, now letting me see her injured hand, and then I go wash up. I get distracted, looking into the knifed-in initials in the beach mirror, thinking about the one funeral and grief again. I want to turn the idea around. I want to say, I've found the capacity that I can be unashamed, that I can be unnervous and joy-filled, and this is it. It's like I found the top, bumped my head drunkenly, angelically against it, and I am thankful because there's no finding it anymore. What a relief there's nothing else there above. Because sometimes when it keeps going, keeps giving, when I look at May or the Pacific, I want to say it's too much, too much. Thank you.